Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the airwaves of the Voice of the Cape. If you just tuned in on 91.3 FM stereo, 89.8, 90.9, 95.8, as well as www.vocfm.co.za. My name is Muhammad Fasih Peterson, and welcome to the special Matric revision program for 2021, a series of programs. Today we'll be focusing on mathematics, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who need a little bit of advice, a little bit of help, and this is the program to get you sorted for your exams, for your Matric exams. We know this is a stressful time for a lot of young people, and in the next couple of weeks we'll be taking you through various subjects and getting you fit for that period of time when we will, in actual fact, be writing. And VOC trying to play its part in assisting you in this period of time. Wherever you are, I hope that you will be attentive. You'll be listening very carefully. Our guest joining us today will be Sandra Dixon. She's a BSc from the University of Stellenbosch, and she's does maths up to third year, was done maths up to third year, and of course she offers extra math lessons for learners grade 8 to 12 and one-on-one teaching to improve learner results. You're welcome to, in the meantime, to comment on our Facebook. We'll be obviously sharing those questions with Sandra. And yes, we are streaming live on Facebook. We're streaming live on YouTube as well, on those platforms. So make sure that you are tuned in. Of course, also, we want to say a big thank you, a big shukran to all of those who have already downloaded the VOC app. If you haven't already, all you've got to do is simply go to Google Play Store, iOS Store, and you'll be able to access the VOC app. They downloaded, and the video link to there will take you straight to our YouTube page on the app, and you'll be able to watch the stream as well. So streaming live, and the YouTube and Facebook will be important because we'll be sharing slides which will correspond with the teaching of the program, and that will of course help you to that will also help you, of course, when it comes to sharing, when it comes to be able to convey that message a little bit more effectively. I am joined today by, as I mentioned, Sandra Dixon. She'll be your maths tutor for today, and I want to start off by welcoming her to the stream, and of course to Facebook, to our listeners and viewers on Facebook as well. Sandra, good day and welcome.
To contribute something to our hard-pressed grade 12 learners.
So, Sandra, firstly, what I want to say is a big thank you, and of course, just the fact that we have an opportunity to engage in maths, something that's so valuable, and as much resources as we have, I think that we sometimes fall a little bit short. And the reason why we fall short is because we have this, it's not so much about resources, but explanation and access to this resources. So I think this is the platform we will be providing to be able to overcome that. So Sandra, I think, without further ado, we'll be taking this program solidly all the way up until 1:45, around about 10 to 1 this afternoon. So I'll leave it to you to start. And of course, the viewers on Facebook as well will be able to engage, and they will be able to see the visuals as we've mentioned. So Sandra Dixon, we are in your hands.
Okay, thank you very much. The format that I'm going to take is to go along with slides, but I'm very much aware that there are people listening on the radio and that they won't be able to see the slides. So therefore, bear with me if I go rather slowly so that people that listen can maybe take notes so that they can see where I'm at. What I'm going to do today is paper 1, the algebra section of the November 2020 paper, which is the paper that the grade 12s wrote for the Basic Education Department of South Africa in November last year. So most certainly, this is the type of standard of paper that the grade 12s can expect for this 2021 year. Now, the first thing I want to draw attention to the learners, because in my teaching and talking to the learners one-on-one that I have on a daily basis, I notice that the actual paper creates fear into almost anybody. When that paper is in front and it's being handed down to the learners, they normally have this horrible fear in their hearts as to what is going to be on the inside of this blue covered paper. Now, to just help you guys very quickly, what is on the inside would be the questions as well as an answer book. Now, this answer book is not liked by every learner. However, make peace with it and use it to your advantage. The advantage of having an answer book and open spaces where you can insert your answers will help you to keep track as you go along this paper. And first of all, do the questions that you know you can do. Because many learners come to me and they say, oh, I couldn't finish the paper. And an easy question was maybe at the end of the paper. So the first tip that I give to learners is to open your paper and then read through it and identify the questions that you know the answers to and answer them first. So I'm going to go chronologically through this paper. For the amount of time that I have today, I will only be able to do question 1. So I'm putting up the first slide of question 1. Now, the way the paper is structured is that the algebra section is the very first question. That is then followed by sequences and series, then followed by your functions and graphs. Then it's followed by your financial mathematics. Thereafter comes your differentiation or calculus portion of the mathematics. And lastly, it's the probability section. So it is very important that you see from past papers that this format is kept right through every single year. So therefore, if your strong point is algebra, you will start definitely and most certainly at question 1. If your next strong point is maybe calculus, you would then go to question 7 or the question that deals with calculus. That way, your mind will be fresh so that you can do the questions of the work that you know best first. Right, so let's look at problem 1.1.1, which is in the November 2020 paper 1 of the Basic Education Department. It normally starts off with a rather simple question. And in this case, we have x squared minus 6x equals 0. Now, I'm reading it out slowly so that the people that follow on the radio have time to write it down. So I'll repeat. The question is x squared minus 6x equals 0. And it says solve for x. Now, it's important that you understand what is meant by solve for x. This means it's an equation. And equations have a number of ways that you can solve them. So the portion, if you are revising after this lesson of mine, please understand that the 2 parts of mathematics that you have to know is factorization as well as being able to do a LCD, local common denominator, in algebra. So this question, it will not be a lowest common denominator because we have no fractions. So it should be obvious to you guys that when you see this type of a question, you have 2 to 3 routes that you can take. The one is by doing a lowest common denominator, that is if you have fractions, or you can do factorization. Now, all of you by now must have seen that this is a factorization problem. So you see my notes on the right-hand side. If you see anything to do with equations, and you've decided on factorization, you need to write down the basic rules of factorization. The first one is one would look for the common factor, or in plain English, something in your equation that repeats. Now, in this case, it's the x, because we have an x squared, which has got an x, and the minus 6x, there's another x. Now, where you guys get caught out, is it because you see the squared, you may think it's the second version of factorization, which is the difference of squares. So I'm just quickly going to go over why this is not the difference of squares. Our tick marks must be that every term here needs to be a square. And difference means there has to be a minus sign. So let's test. X times x, yes, that's a square. But 6 is not a square number. So therefore, the difference of squares will not work for this equation. So what we will now do then is we will take out the x, and you would put an open bracket. That x that you took out, you will divide into the x squared, and you will be left with an x minus, and you'll divide that x that you took out into the 6x, and you will be left with a 6. So the answer is going to be x, open bracket, x minus 6, close bracket, equals 0. And thereafter, you will put the x to 0 and the x minus 6 to 0. So to conclude, the answer would be x equals 0 or x equals 6. Now, important again when you recognize what to do with this problem is that the x squared already tells you that there's going to be 2 answers. And it's not a linear equation. That is why you will not start off by saying x squared equals 6x. In other words, separating the terms, because that is the other common problem or mistake that you guys make with this problem. So I'm going to go off this question, and I hope I've given you guys a good idea of how to approach a question like this. The second question is also, it is a trinomial, but I find again that many of you don't understand what they mean by correct to 2 decimal places at the end. But for the listeners, let me read off the question. It says solve for x, and this time it's a trinomial, and it says x squared plus 10x plus 8 equals 0. In brackets, correct to 2 decimal places. Now, that is your cue that if any question in this section is saying correct to 2 decimal places, that means you've got to use the formula to get to the answer. Now, I've put up the formula, and it's the formula that says solving for x equals minus b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Now, for a grade 12 learner, this formula should be familiar to you. However, if you've forgotten this formula and you turn to the formula sheet, which will be in your question paper, you'll find that this formula is right at the top of the formula sheet as the very first formula given on the information page. So there's no reason why a jittery brain or somebody that's nervous can forget this formula, because it is in your information page, the very first formula. Now one needs to understand how this formula works. So you will see there's a B, and a C. The A value you will find in front of the x squared. Now, typical of math, there's nothing there. It means that there's a 1. So A would be equal to 1. Then we get the second term, which is plus 10x. Now, the coefficient of x here, the plus 10, is the B value. And then we get plus 8. So the third term, the plus 8, would be your C. And remember to take the signs with the coefficients. So if we plug this into that formula, we will now get minus 10 plus minus the square root of, and please put it into brackets, open bracket, 10, close bracket, and then the squared, minus 4, open bracket, a equals 1, close bracket, open bracket, 8, close bracket, which is your C, all divided by 2, open bracket, 1, close bracket. Now, I strongly advise that you write this step in your answer, into your answer, because all the memorandum gives marks for filling in the B, the A, and the C incorrectly. Now, there's a plus and a minus, so we will go to our calculator, type it in as is on our calculator, and first use the plus. We will get an answer, write it down, then we will backspace in the calculator and change the plus to a minus, redo the calculation and get your second answer. Now the answer to this will be x equals minus 0,88 or x equals minus 9,12. Again, 2 answers, because it's a trinomial, which tells us we have to have 2 answers. Now, important, here they tell you to do 2 decimal places. That means you have to be very sharp when you round off. In the front of the paper will tell you that it wants everything rounded to 2 decimal places unless stated differently. And this rounding is another mark. So if you round off incorrectly, you can lose up to 4 marks in your paper just because you cannot round numbers off properly. This is especially true in the trigonometry section of paper 2. The next question, 1.1.3. This question is important to recognize, first of all, that it's an inequality. Inequalities has a life of their own, even though the basic rules for them are exactly the same as if you had an equal sign. So let's look at this one. We have two brackets. Now the objective of solving any equation is to have it in its simplest form, factorized, which ends up in brackets. So you need to see here immediately that half of the work was already done for you. If we look at the paper and we look at the mark allocation for this problem, it's 3 marks. So it presupposes not a lot of work. So please do not multiply the brackets together if you are presented with an already factorized equation. We can see that before it was factorized, that it was a trinomial, because somewhere in there, we multiply an x with an x, which gives us x squared. So we immediately need to know, because it's already factorized, we need to set each bracket to 0, like I've done on my slide. So I said 1 minus x is less than 0, or the second bracket, x plus 2 is less than 0. This way we will get critical values. Now, let's go to the second bracket first. That is plain and simple. It's a linear equation, so we will separate the x's from the numbers. So we'll end up by saying x is less than minus 2. There's nothing funny here. But the first one was designed to catch us out. The first one says 1 minus x less than 0. Now, when you do an inequality and you see a minus in front of an x, you must immediately know that the equality will switch. So check my big red arrow that I have there. So we'll end up having minus x is less than minus 1. So far, so good. However, they don't want minus x for an answer. They want x. To get x, we have to divide by minus 1. So we end up having an x on the left-hand side and a positive 1 on the right-hand side. But note, because we divided by a negative, the inequality changes from a less than to a greater than. Now, I did not include it on the slide here, but you are required now to draw a parabola. And the answer will be in the end, x is less than minus 2 or x is greater than 1. In some more lessons that I will do, I will explain this more clearly. Now, our fourth question. For the listeners on the radio, it's our square root, the one symbol that we do not want to see in mathematics, a square root, especially in algebra. So to read it out to the listeners, it's a square root, and under the square root, we have an x plus 18 equals x minus 2. Now the rule here is, and we need to know, that the opposite of a square root is a square. And the opposite of something squared would be the square root. So in this case, we have a square root. So we will square this term. Of much importance is that when we use this technique, the term with a square root has to be alone by itself. So if there were any other terms around it, which we do not have in this case, we would take it to the right-hand side. So if you follow my solution, we will then have the square root x plus 18 squared. But if you do it on the left-hand side, you need to do the same on the right-hand side. So we put the x minus 2 in brackets and we square the whole thing. Now, you may notice that there's not much algebra in this first question. Only 22 marks in this particular paper. However, algebra is tested in every question that follows in paper 1 as well as in paper 2. So we feel disheartened because we did all this algebra from grade 8 to grade 12, and now we see only 22 marks of algebra. Rest assured, the rest of the paper is peppered with algebra. Right, so let's get back to the question. So we now have square root x plus 18 squared. Basically, it means that the square root falls away. So we are left with x plus 18 on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we need to multiply these two brackets out. So we will multiply the x with the x, we'll end up with x squared. And I'm using the composite rule here. So then we multiply the x with a 2, and we multiply it by 2. We end up getting minus 4x plus minus 2 squared equals 4. Now again, a simple rule that you guys often forget. Again, it's a trinomial. And if you have a trinomial, you need to have a 0 either on the left or on the right. So please, guys, if you solve equations, check whether it's a trinomial, in other words, there's an x squared, or whether you are having a linear equation. The rules are different. With a x squared or a trinomial, you need a 0 either to the left or to the right. If it's a linear equation where there are no squares, you need to separate the letters from the numbers. Very, very important. So my calculations, I trust the people on Facebook will be able to follow it. It will be pretty difficult to follow me on the radio, but bear with me. You end up with a trinomial with a 0 to the left equals x squared minus 5x minus 14. Now we need to factorize this, and it factorizes into two brackets. The first bracket has got an x minus 7 in it, and the second bracket a x plus 2. And I trust you guys can see by now that if you do not understand factorization, you are writing yourself a death sentence in mathematics. So our end answer would be x equals 7 or x equals minus 2. And this will get you 5 marks. And this type of a question is in every year's question, so it's worth brushing up on this. I'm going to skip question 1.2 to solve simultaneously for X and Y. But I've put it in because it's part of this paper and so that you guys can see how this one was done. What I do want to say about the method or the methodology of solving simultaneously for an X and a Y means you need to get an answer for X and answers for Y. So don't just stop when you reach to the X. You need to do that last step to get your last marks. Now, the way we would go about approaching this is you would go to the simplest equation first, which is in this case, X plus Y equals 3. And we would make either the X or the Y the subject of the equation, as I've done here. I chose the X and I'm simplifying it to say X equals 3, and I'm taking the Y to the right-hand side. The sign changes, so it becomes X equals 3 minus Y. Then what we do, we now sort of know what X is, even though there's still a Y there, and we substitute this into the more complex equation. So wherever you find an X in the complex equation, you would substitute it with 3 minus Y. And then there's a whole bunch of algebra to be done, which you guys are most welcome to chat to me afterwards about explaining this, but I'm going to leave it at this. The answers are at the end. Y equals minus 3 over 2, or Y equals 1. And remember the X values. X equals 9 over 2, or X equals 2. So that would be the final answer to this question. Okay, I'm just going to ask my host whether there's more time or whether we should stop here.
Well, I think we have time to finish this slide, and then obviously we'll have to wrap up. But there is still enough time just to conclude on the 7th slide or the 7th page.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now 1.3 is the level 4 question in this paper. So another thing that you guys must understand is that the paper is very carefully constructed. There's enough marks in there for everybody that did his work throughout the years to pass. So the way the paper is structured, that there are questions which some learners may regard as, gee whiz, but this is easy. And then there are questions like this one, where most people will scratch their head and wonder what on earth is going on here. Now, simple, you may run to your calculator and do the 200th root of 5 to the power 300. And you will quickly find your calculator says, sorry, no can do. So they're very clever. They're using huge numbers to force you to do the proper mathematics around this. Now, and this is an inequality again, but of importance is to see that this is exponents. Now, I've told you in the beginning that we either do factorization or the LCD when we solve equations. And I did say 2 or 3 methods. Now, here is your third method. Any problem that has exponents in it has a life of its own rules. Now, in this case, let's look at the n to the power 200 less than 5 to the power 300, and we need to find the largest integer for n. Important, integer. That means your answer has to be a whole number. So your answer cannot be a decimal. It has to be a whole number like 1, 2, 10, 11, something like that. So it's important to read your questions properly, and I strongly suggest that you circle the word integer so that you remember when you get to the end to give your answer as an integer. Now, if we look again at this n to the power 200, we need to focus on the exponents. And we see we have a 200 on the one side and the 300 to the other side. So with our knowledge of mathematics, factorization, we can basically take 100 out of both. So we could end up with n to the power 2 to the power 100, because 2 times 100 gives you 200. And on the right-hand side, we will take out a 3. So we end up with 5 to the power 3 to the power 100. Again, 3 times 100 gives us 300. And as I said to you guys, exponents have got a life of their own. Now, here's a rule where we can now take the 100, which is common to both sides, out. And we end up with n to the power 2 less than 5 to the power 3. And all of a sudden, the difficulty is gone. Because now we end up with, and I'm going to skip a step, n less than the square root of 125. Because remember, the opposite of a square, n squared, is a square root. So to get rid of the square on the left-hand side, we take a root on the right-hand side. And in this case, the square root. We go to our calculator and we get the square root of 125. And the answer is 11.18. But now go back to the beginning. They want an integer for an answer. So you have to give a whole number. So in this case, because it's an inequality, our answer is either 11 or 12. So let's see what makes our equation true. So if we use 11, we'll see it satisfies the equation. 12 will be too big if we use the number 12. So the whole number, the answer to this question, n equals 11. I trust you guys found benefit from listening to me, and I wish you guys happy and fruitful learning using the tips that I try to give.
Sandra, I want to say a big thank you for joining us. There have been some requests on the comments for people who are looking to get your details. We'll have them at reception if people want to get a hold of you for further tutoring. Sandra Dixon, BSc from University of Stellenbosch with maths up to third year. And of course, she offers extra math lessons for learners grade 8 to 12 and one-on-one teaching to improve learners' results. And also, this recording will be up on Facebook as well as YouTube for you to consume further. From myself, Mohammed Fasif Peterson, it's been a pleasure being in your company. It's next now up time for us to cross for the Waqt of Dhuhr. Once again, a big thank you to our guest, Sandra Dixon, and of course to you, the listener, for tuning in. Next up, the Waqt for Dhuhr. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How did it go?